3 vibrant urban campuses, and deeply rooted partnerships at home and around the world. The world's #1 university for impact on sustainable cities and communities. We are also ranked 7th among the world's top universities for our entrepreneurial spirit. And we are also supported by Emerge GX. So take it away, Jennifer.
Thanks, Eric. So hello, everyone. Like Eric said, I'm Jennifer, the marketing officer from Emerge GX. So like you, I also love learning design and I want to work on projects for my portfolio, but it's super hard to learn and get design experience. Like I can't afford $2,000 for a bootcamp and I haven't really touched my Coursera design course in a while. Maybe some of you can relate. That's because there's no one to give me feedback so I can improve. Like there's no sense of community to keep me motivated to learn design online. And that's why I'm part of Emerge. So we help students like you learn through live and engaging courses where you'll get feedback on your work from our instructors and stay motivated with a community of other learners that you can become friends with. So the instructor for our UX design course, which is starting in September, is the creator of UX Library, Joshua Kola. And as a special promotion due to the Protothon, Emerge is offering an exclusive discount on our courses, which start in September. The discount code is VXP10, and you can apply it at emergegx.com. So the code is VXP10, and you can apply it at emergegx.com. I'll drop the link in the Discord as well. So this discount does expire tomorrow on Sunday, August 29th, the last day of the Protothon competition, and there are limited seats available. And make sure you sign in with Google before applying the discount. So if you have any questions or if the discount code doesn't work, feel free to message us on any of our social media at EmergeGX. And now I'll pass it back to the VXP team for the rest of the opening ceremony.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer, for an amazing offer. When Emerge started at SFU, I was one of the first people to attend, and then I ended up teaching there for a year. And now it has led me to doing this. So yeah, that's where my origin was. So really, really thankful for Emerge for giving me this opportunity too, and giving others the same opportunity. And now we got a lot of support from online design communities. They all started right before COVID and has become really big communities for all designers. They host amazing workshops for all designers, beginner or professional intermediate, about every aspect of becoming a designer. So please join them if you're looking to dive deeper in the world of design. We have Vancouver Design Check-in, which is a community on Slack, started by our very own Gerald from Copperleaf. And we have the Collective Studio, which is also very growing design community in North America. And finally, we have Design Buddies. Most people already do know Design Buddies since the fastest growing design community here in North America or the world, not the world. Now, we have some amazing judges here, very experienced, who will be judging all our competitors, all your work. So we have David and Karen from Central One. We have Eva and Jarrell from Copperleaf, being product designers, product managers. We have Marissa, who's a product designer at TikTok, Nadia, UX UI designer for Workforce, and also an admin from Design Buddies. We have Claire, which is a product and UX designer and a founder of Collective Studio Design Committee. And we have Yaman, who's a design intern at Shopify, sorry. Now, moving on to what y'all are here for. Basically, I'm going to go through the submission criteria as much as possible. So basically what we're looking for you to submit is one interactive prototype, preferably Figma, a usability test plan, a presentation pitch deck, and all of the above being presented in a 5-minute video presentation. The more details about this is sent out on a document on Discord. We're going to put that out. It will have everything you need to know. We have also linked each and every submission here connected to our workshops from our workshop week, actually, which we have pre-recorded them, also send it through on the document so you can have a look, watch, and get a better idea on these. But if you do have more questions on this, feel free to ask on our Discord chat, where in Ask VXP, I will be personally responding to those questions if you have more, if you require more information on these. We have amazing mentors, like 18 to 20 mentors from everywhere, and they're very highly experienced in their own way. They all have their speciality and experiences. So like they have their time schedule, which is noted on our schedule list, which is posted again on Discord. All our information is posted on Discord. So feel free to see who is suitable for what, and ask help from them on our Ask Mentor text channel in Discord, and feel free to coordinate with them. We have some couple of voice rooms open in the Discord, so if you want to chat with them personally, you can definitely do so and get some one-to-one help from them. Also, again, we also gave guidelines to our mentors that they are not allowed to give you guys the answers and solutions, obviously, because that will be cheating otherwise. So they are only there to help you guide through your projects and make sure try to help you get the best possible version of your design. Here are our 22 participant teams and counting. We couldn't get more. So if you don't see your team here, don't panic. If you have talked to our Zoe here, she have probably hooked you in already, because we had some last minute team formations. So we have team 1 to 9. I would not go through all of them because there's still quite many. Then we have the rest of the teams here. And now moving on. So like we have been very secretive about prizes. We've been trying to get, we're trying to scrap whatever money we could to help our participants actually feel accomplished when they win the prizes. Like, let alone portfolio pieces, definitely worth more in my opinion, but some incentive on the side. We have the first place being 1,000 Canadian dollars, second place 500 Canadian dollars, and third prize being 250 Canadian dollars. So I'm very specific on the Canadian dollars because people from everywhere will consider it as US dollars sometimes. So yeah, so so it's more competitive, trying to raise the bar for competitive with this prize money. And finally, the theme reveal is mental health, literacy, and practice. Reason we chose this was because of COVID, everybody was stuck inside. I myself had many friends that were stuck inside and couldn't meet each other. Some of them were international students and were away from their family for a really long time in isolation. So a lot of them either faced mental health problems newly, or some of them had a relapse of their own mental health from past. So we thought this would be perfect to be creative in our designer way and create a design solution for a theme or criteria like this. We also have a sub-theme from Copperleaf, which will be awarded the Copperleaf Award for Best Value-Based Decision Making. They have an additional criteria that is also added onto the document. But yeah, Ian, if you'd like to emphasize more on this a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Let me just fire my camera back on. It's a good thing I was paying attention. So the problem statement, or the how might we statement around this, was how might we make better value-based decisions for ourselves? So kind of going back to if you could imagine within the domain of Copperleaf, where you have 1,000 different things you could decide to do, which ones are going to provide the most value for yourself. So some potential things that you could pull from things that we use within our products are questionnaires that would allow you to start tracking your ups and downs of where you're at. So just prompts to be able to visualize perhaps your mood and your feelings, and creating comprehensive goals that you could correlate against those insights could be a couple interesting things. Obviously, yourself, it's hard to quantify feelings. So how might you get around that? That's an interesting frame for us. And how can you make sure that you reward yourselves? Like how are you going to gamify your mental health, I guess, which perhaps is a little bit of a taboo saying, but how can you pull some of those UX and product focused solutions that have worked in other spaces into mental health? Could be an interesting angle as well. So those won't be the winners, but just a couple spoilers there. That's all I had.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. We do have that. So for the sub team, we do have this award Copperleaf. We have yet decided there is a prize money that will be associated with this. That's going to be separate from the first, second, and third prize, just to have like somebody like for you guys to actually try to aim for that sub theme as well, because it's like an extra criteria and making that extra effort to create a more specific design solution. Now, with all that said, I think I've got everything that I wanted to for opening ceremony. This Twitch channel is going to be on this whole entire time. There's going to be a countdown to the submission time. And regarding the theme, now, one of the first few steps that you do in our, when you start with the design project in the 5-step design is to like try to ideate and empathize and try to learn more about the problem itself. So to do that, we have Katarina that'll be having that's coming from mental health literacy to talk about more about mental health and give you guys a better idea on how to like design around it. After that, let me pull out the schedule here, because we also have a few other panels and discussions about the theme. So 9:30 right now, like in about 8 minutes, Katarina will talk. And then we have Designing Self-Care by Sori Lee from Amazon, actually. And she's going to be talking about her perspective about mental health and how she deals with mental health at her workplace. And finally, we have at 10:30, we have Mental Health and Sustainability in Design, presented by Seedlings R & Co., which is a startup that aims to help people with sustainable instruments, design instruments, and help people maintain their mental health, keep track of their mental health. So look out for those. And we will start at 10 a.m. exactly for the countdown. In the meanwhile, since we're a little bit early, can we start? Will it be okay if we put Katarina on Katarina's panel? Just start now, or do we put it a little bit later? Okay, I'm getting some yes here right now. So yeah, thank you all for coming and attending. Like, this is really great because this is our first time hosting this kind of a thing. It could be a little bit janky here and there, but we're trying our best to not screw it up. So please bear with us. And yeah, hopefully you guys have a great time designing. Happy designing. Now passing on to Katarina whenever.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you to everyone for having me here today. I'm representing mentalhealthliteracy.org, of course. So just before we get started, I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region, here where I am, upon which the southern part of the province of Alberta was established. This includes the nations comprising the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and Stoney Nakoda First Nation. The city of Calgary itself is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And as settlers at mentalhealthliteracy.org, we acknowledge the treaty territories and relations that have not been honored, and we work daily to restore good relations with the First Peoples of this land. So I'm just going to share my screen with you and present. All right. So yeah, my name is Katarina Daignault. I'm a project and research assistant at mentalhealthliteracy.org and also the head of the Youth Advisory Council. I am so excited to be here with you today. So just as a little PSA, this material is under copyright. All of our material was developed by the really esteemed psychiatrist Dr. Stan Kuchar. And when he was appointed to the Canadian Senate, he did gift Alberta Health Services the intellectual material. No profit is to be made from any of the materials, and the fidelity of the messaging is to be maintained. Feel free to use it for educational purposes. Healthcare providers are welcome to use it, as long as it's not altered or changed in any way, because it is all evidence-based and steeped in science. So the question I want to start with, and since I'm unable to see the stream right now, perhaps Zoe can read me some of your answers. What is mental health to you? I want to hear from the participants.
I think we're just waiting a little bit on a delay here, but to me, mental health is the well-being and balance in my life, the ability to, I don't know, go about my day in the best way I can. We have one saying the emotional state and how it incorporates in their life, the health of your psychological mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some great answers.
Yeah, no, those are excellent answers. So the World Health Organization actually defines mental health as a state of well-being, enabling individuals to realize their abilities, cope with the normal stresses of life, work productively and fruitfully, and make meaningful contributions to their communities. And there's something really, really important that I'd like everyone to kind of notice about this definition. At no point does it mention happiness. And that's key, or contentedness, or joy, or positive mood in any way. Good mental health does not equate to happiness. Mental health is a range of normal emotions and experiences, including stress, that can help you and move you forward in your life. Having this healthy range of emotions is part of having good mental health. So mental health literacy, it's kind of in the name. A lot of the time we talk about mental health awareness. We see it everywhere. We see it on campuses, we see it in workplaces, we see it every year with the Bell Let's Talk campaign. And these are fantastic things. But the goal of mental health literacy is to move that conversation forward. For example, sitting through this presentation, or everyone who was speaking earlier, I'm aware of, design. I'm aware of software development. I'm aware of calculus and neuroscience and aerospace engineering. I'm aware that these things exist, but I'm not literate in them. I don't know anything about what those fields actually are, what they entail, what they include. So mental health literacy is actually developing a working understanding of mental health within yourself, within your community, what it actually is, how to maneuver it, because the thing is, everyone has mental health, just as everyone has physical health. So there are 4 components to mental health literacy that we kind of work off of. There is the understanding and obtaining to maintain good mental health, understanding and identifying mental disorders and their treatments, reducing stigma, and enhancing help-seeking efficacy, which just means knowing where to go when you need help with your mental health, when you need to go, when it's becoming too much for you to manage on your own, and kind of what to expect when you get there. What are you going to hear from a mental health practitioner or clinician? And some of the tools you're likely to be introduced to, like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness work, etc. Okay. So there's a lot of semantic confusion around mental health, just meaning that we use a lot of different words to describe various things about mental health. And all of these words have been pulled from academic literature, government documents, social media, the media in general, to describe a very specific thing, to describe mental disorder. This slide demonstrates how much confusion there is around the topic of mental health and mental disorders, not only in the general public, but in professionals who work within the field. And by calling a mental illness or a mental disorder anything other than a mental illness or a mental disorder, we actually perpetuate stigma because we're not telling it like it is. For example, a mental health issue is one of the things you see on this slide. And that term is super unclear, and it really muddies the water when everything can be referred to as a mental health issue. So, for example, a child having, a temper tantrum or a little bit of a meltdown at a store because their mom said no to something may be experiencing a bit of a mental health issue. They're very experiencing a really heightened emotional state. But a person living with schizophrenia and having a psychotic break could also be experiencing a mental health issue. So this really makes the meaning behind this phrasing very confusing and difficult to understand, which is why literacy is so important when it comes to mental health. So there is a lot of confusion and headlines that are misleading and misinformed in the media. We see it everywhere, even in things like medical news today. But, why skipping this one meal could be bad for your mental health. Looking at the research behind that, there's certain things that might be good, certain things that might not be, but it's very misleading information that we are bombarded with every day about mental health. Did Jennifer Garner actually have a legitimate panic attack with her regards to her Oscar dress in 2014? We don't know, but it is creating a dialogue and taking a clinical piece of language, a panic attack, and putting it in everyday conversation, which is where it doesn't belong. And this is why mental health can be so confusing, because we hear depression, panic attack, anxiety, very clinical definitions like, oh, I'm so ADHD today. We take those and we use them in everyday conversation, and that dilutes their meaning when we take it out of that clinical context. So this slide is probably going to be the most important one that I talk to you about today. So the pyramid is something that mental health literacy has developed and we work with. And every level on this pyramid is part of mental health. So everyone has a pyramid. Depending on where you are, it can look different for every person, but we all have mental health and we've all been at different points on this pyramid of mental states. If you notice, it's bigger at the bottom than at the top to demonstrate that more of us are on the bottom levels than on the top most of the time. So I'm going to go through and review each term with you. So at the bottom of the pyramid where we have no distress, problem, or disorder, that's where we're kind of just doing fine. There's no particular problems around our mental health that are worth mentioning. The next is mental distress. And mental distress is unavoidable. And another word for this is stress. This is a state of stress. It's an inevitable part of life and can spur on developing skills and build resiliency. So there is a difference between stress of everyday life and toxic stress from prolonged kind of things like abuse or neglect. And I just really want to clarify that I'm talking about everyday stressors. So for example, I lost Wi-Fi connection during the middle of a presentation. That's very stressful. I am coming and giving a talk to a bunch of people who are very good with technology, which is something I struggle with. This is a stressful experience for me. There is, stress the first time you ever drive a car. This is a good form of stress because you are learning a new skill and pushing yourself forward. So those things can be very relatable. We've all had these things and we all have them. Mental distress is a signal from our brain that we need to adapt to our environment and that there's a problem that we have to solve. When we solve the problem, the distress tends to go away and we're left with a new skill or a new experience that we can use to help us solve further problems. Like, for example, today I'm learning a lot just by listening, and I'm going to feel less nervous coming into any kind of talk around technology and those kinds of things. Mental distress is necessary for growth and development, and we all have the ability to mitigate stress. And this is how we learn how to problem solve and develop coping skills to manage throughout the rest of our lives. The next term is mental problem. And this also may arise in response to an environmental stressor, but one of like a significantly greater magnitude, such as the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, immigration, a worldwide pandemic. And when faced with such a large stressor, our capacity to mitigate that stress can be overwhelmed for a time. This doesn't mean that there's an illness or disorder. On the contrary, what we're experiencing is like an expected or normal response to such a significant stressor. Mental problems are an indicator that we're having difficulty adapting to the new environment, and we may need help coping. So counseling, additional family or community support, et cetera, And a really good example of a mental health problem is grief, which is a normal response to a significant stressor. Losing a loved one is hugely tragic, and not to say that a disorder can't develop, but grief in and of itself is not a disorder. It is a normal response to going through a trauma like losing a loved one. Note that like experiencing the COVID pandemic may or may not be a mental problem for some people. For one person, it could be super manageable as a stressor, while others may experience mental distress or even mental problems. And for some people, it may really not be a problem at all. So it's all relative. Mental health and experiences are all going to be relative to each individual person and their resiliency. On the very top of the pyramid in pink there, we have mental illness or disorder. And this is caused by an actual alteration in usual brain function, or like a disruption or hiccup in how your brain is processing. It can sometimes occur regardless of environmental factors, but most often it's the result of a complex interaction between environment, genetics, and something we call epigenetics, or intergenerational traumas that alter your genetic expression. Worldwide, 15 to 20% of the population will have a mental illness, and anyone with a mental illness is going to thrive best when they have access to trained professionals for proper diagnosis and proven and effective treatments. It's important to note that you can exist at any stage of this pyramid individually or at the same time. This is not like a level up system. So for example, a student who has ADHD, which is a mental disorder, may be experiencing a mental problem, like having ended a long-term relationship with their partner, and they may be stressed as well and experiencing mental distress about an exam that's coming up. So they are simultaneously existing at 3 different levels of the pyramid. But maybe when they go home, they listen to an audiobook, they practice some mindfulness for that period of time. These are not gone, they're not away, but they're in this level of the pyramid as well, because they're able to center themselves a little bit. Mental health is present in all of these states. Again, it's not about being happy all the time. It goes back to that definition as being a state of well-being in which you are able to fully operate, cope with normal stress, and make a contribution to your community. It's important to realize that some people who are diagnosed with a clinical mental disorder may have better mental health than people who don't have a mental disorder. It's all about how we work through our mental health, how we manage it, and how we approach it. So this is a slide that I wanted to highlight because it shows the dangers of using self-reports and the importance of mental health literacy. The light green bars there, they show how people answered yes to having the disorder listed, whereas the dark green bars are the actual prevalence of that clinical diagnosis within the population. Granted, of course, there's going to be people who maybe didn't have access to be formally diagnosed for whatever reason, but out of the UK, where the public health system is free and accessible, it is quite alarming to see so many people pathologizing what might be a mental problem or mental distress as a clinical mental health disorder. And that's really, really important, because the way we approach and manage mental health is going to look different for someone with a clinical diagnosis as opposed to somebody who's experiencing a different place on the pyramid. So, for example, if you look at depression right here, people who have reported that they have depression, that is a huge difference between the people who actually have a clinical diagnosis of depression. So when we say, I'm feeling really depressed, it's important that we evaluate that use of that clinical language. Am I sad? Am I experiencing grief? Like, what are other words that are not clinical and are not reducing or minimizing a clinical disorder to a feeling? That's really important for stigma reduction. So there are some problems facing mental health today that I thought might be useful for you to go through and think about while you're developing your apps and products today. So there are things like lack of literacy, individually and societally. People, like we are aware of mental health, but a lot of people are not aware of mental health literacy. They're not literate in mental health, despite their best efforts to be aware and to make a difference in terms of their own mental health or support others. They don't actually understand the intricacies of mental health. So education is really important. Another one is that there is a huge amount of misinformation in the media and on social media. And as practitioners in mental health, we say first, do no harm. And the unfortunate reality with misinformation is that it almost always does some degree of harm because it perpetuates misunderstanding, misinformation, and stigma. There's also the issue of one-size-fits-all approaches to mental health. And again, it's going to look different for disorder versus distress in terms of mental health, but also person to person. So there's a lot of apps like Calm, for example, is super famous, works super well for some people to meditate in order to practice mindfulness and to bring themselves down and center themselves. But for other people, centering themselves, like for me, for example, trying to meditate, I try to clear my mind, and it's like every intrusive thought I have ever had in my entire life enters my brain as soon as I try to calm down and listen to Harry Styles read me a short story. So that particular approach to mindfulness or centering myself doesn't work for me, but that tends to be what most people gravitate to or is the first thing recommended. So acknowledging that there's no one size fits all approach. For some people, physical activity is going to be better. For others, reading a book or listening to an audiobook is going to be better. For some people, playing video games can be really therapeutic and better. There's all these different things to consider with mental health and what mindfulness and centering oneself is going to look like. And then, of course, there's lack of access to appropriate care. So this is a problem worldwide where people are just not able to access the mental health resources they need. But in terms of something that is solvable through an app, there's a lot of resources that people don't know about. So for example, in my city here in Calgary, we have 5 agencies that offer free counseling on a one-time basis, on a continuous basis, distress kind of emergency basis that can be continuing, sliding scale, free, like whatever you need them to be, but people just don't know about them. So people not only don't have access to the care they need, they just don't know that it's there. So that's another issue that could be faced. So connecting people to the appropriate line and channel of care is going to be really important. These are just a few ideas to consider. Obviously, there is so much around mental health and it's going to look so different for everyone, but I'm so excited to see what all of you come up with. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. I am going to stop sharing my screen and just go divert back to Zoe or Eric.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I know I found it super helpful, and there are some amazing individuals here also sharing some great opinions and a lot of support for you as well. So we have a couple questions right now, and I think some of them may be for Eric as well. Let's see. Right. How can we predict what approach would be most effective for a person?
For a person individually, it's hard to predict because if it's not you personally, you really can't know. I would say the best thing to do is to support that person and try and help them as much as possible in order to find what works for them. If you're needing them to, I don't know, if they're willing, the best thing to do would be to consult a professional who can maybe guide them to those appropriate resources.
Thank you for that. Oh, we have a couple more comments. Great presentation. Mental health advocacy is, and another one was, what is the difference between CBT and DBT, and how does it differ from counselors in schools?
Okay, so this is a tough one. Counselors in schools. I am gonna break some really hard news. Counselor in school, like anyone can be a counselor. It is not a protected title. So more often than not, at least in my province, school counselors have a master's in counseling or a master's in educational leadership or something like that. So the role of school counselor has really evolved, but more often than not, school counselors are not mental health professionals. And that is really, really risky and dangerous because a lot of the times school psychologists are not funded. We don't have clinical social workers who are operating as school psychologists. It's another teacher. And that's a problem. obviously, because we have expanded the role of school counselor over the last decade or so to not just be, you know, related to academic work, but to be the go-to mental health professional in a building. And the reality is they're not mental health professionals more often than not, especially below the high school level. They are just teachers who have been given the designation of counselor. So in terms of like CBT and DBT, I don't really understand how that question relates to the school counselor role, because a school counselor is generally not able to practice either of those things because they're not licensed to. So cognitive behavioral therapy and DBT, which is dialectic behavioral therapy, are two kind of different forms of psychotherapy, which is like a more of a talk therapy approach, where you are learning about the challenges you're experiencing and kind of managing them. So cognitive behavioral therapy teaches you through like a triangle, how your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors influence each other. So if you believe a certain thing, you might avoid a certain situation. Like if I believe that this person doesn't like me, I'm going to avoid spending time with that person. So that is going to influence that thought of this person doesn't like me is going to influence my behavior. And then I'm going to feel like sad or upset or lonely. So that's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all connected. So cognitive behavioral therapy is going to teach you how to mitigate that, like stop one of those things, change one factor, change a thought, change a feeling or a behavior, and to change your life more positively. So if you're able to like stop that thought or, you know, change that behavior, you're like, well, maybe that person doesn't like me, but I'm going to go to that event anyway because I want to go and have fun. That is going to change that process and that feedback loop that CBT kind of uses. And it's kind of the gold standard for a lot of psychotherapists and counselors and psychologists to use. But DBT is also very like becoming more prominent, and it was kind of built off of cognitive behavioral therapy. With it just has like a greater focus on emotional and social aspects. So it was developed to help people cope with extreme emotions and harmful behaviors. And it's an approach to like regulate emotions specifically rather than altering one of those three. And it started as a treatment for personality disorders, and it can help with a lot of different mental health illnesses. So it's newer, it's being more researched, but it tends to focus more on the emotion rather than on those three things in cognitive behavioral therapy, if that makes sense. Did I explain that okay?
Yeah, that was great. And I think leading into that is, when you say support a person, do you mean connect them with a professional or just point them to more info for awareness?
It can be really both. For me, my go-to is always, if a person is open to it, to point them in the direction of a professional, right? Because as friends and family, we can only be so supportive because we're not practitioners. It would be like, you know, if my husband or partner like cut his hand on a knife while he was cooking dinner, I could, you know, wrap it up. But if it was like a real bad cut, I'd be like, we need to see a doctor. My third grade first aid class is not prepared to handle this in a more obviously thoughtful and compassionate way when dealing with mental health. Just being able to gently say, I'm here to support you in whatever way I can, but I'm not a clinician, so I can't give you what you need. And I think that would be a really good support for you. So being supportive sometimes looks like knowing when to encourage someone to seek support outside of you because of the capacity that you have. And that's also part of protecting yourself and your own mental health.
I think that also covered Stephanie's question in chat here as well. Adrian here asks, so is the responsibility on the parents who may not understand mental health to help their child? Or if the school says this child is difficult or autistic, what should parents know?
The responsibility on the, like, I don't know. Parents know their children better than anyone. I'm a big advocate for that, working in education, but I would say that the school, like if the school brings up an issue, like a behavioral issue, depending on where you are, it is worth talking to a school psychologist, because they are the people who they work both in education and psychology. And if it's a behavioral issue, they can identify it. If it's an academic issue, they can identify it. But if like a school personnel, like a teacher, should never really ever say your child is autistic. That is a clinical diagnosis that, like a doctor, like a psychiatrist, a school psychologist, a clinical child psychologist can make. A teacher can't really make that call, so that would be really unprofessional. But if a parent hears from a school that your child is having difficulty with reading or writing or XYZ, is there anything we should know? It might be worth consulting a school psychologist. So the responsibility should, depending on where you are. Here in Alberta, school psychology is underfunded. But in the United States, for example, a parent can request a psychoeducational evaluation be done on their child, and it has to be done within 60 calendar days. So that, I think, is kind of the gray area where kids fall through the cracks, because it really is different place to place, region to region. But for a parent, if you find out that your child is having difficulty, it's worthwhile to try and educate yourself and become as literate as possible, and to consult professionals. So it would definitely, the first place I would go would be to a doctor.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that it was possible to get school psychologists. So I guess we're also a little bit behind in that in BC here. Someone else also asks, I have realized that perfectionism is always considered OCD, even when they don't have the clear symptoms of OCD. So what are these relations, and how can we overcome that stigma of saying it within conversation? And are they the same?
No, perfectionism and obsessive compulsive disorder are not the same. Having an obsessive compulsive disorder, symptomatically, it goes beyond perfection, and it's a really difficult place to be for someone, because it's like, it has to be this way or I cannot function. Whereas perfectionism, like, I'm a perfectionist. I will spend forever making my slides look beautiful and nice, even though it's absolutely unnecessary. I will, it's different. It's one is, a preference, something you can control, while the other is a clinical diagnosis. Perfectionism can be a symptom somewhat of obsessive compulsive disorder, but in terms of taking that clinical language out, it's the same as, taking any kind of problematic language out of conversation. We don't use certain racial slurs anymore. Some people do, and it's just that gentle but assertive, hey, obsessive compulsive disorder is a clinical diagnosis that a lot of people have to live with. Could you maybe say that you're a little perfectionistic, or you maybe put too much attention to detail? It doesn't have to be aggressive, but delivering that assertively and kindly in order to make them receptive and have them know how you're feeling. Because just bring up, how would someone with obsessive compulsive disorder feel to hear you say that when you're just feeling, perfectionistic about a specific thing?
As you said, self-reporting has considerable detriments. In that case, the goal of mental health literacy is to ultimately encourage people to connect to mental health professionals or reduce instances of inaccurate self-reporting.
Yes and no. Like, I would say that inaccurate self-reporting is part of it, but we just want people to be aware of their mental health, because it's almost as though the pendulum has swung, because we're very aware of mental health now without being very literate in it. We are all report, I've definitely told myself, like, I've thought maybe I have XYZ. And, our goal is to have people be literate enough in their mental health in order to know when to seek professional help, and know the difference between what a disorder is, what mental distress is, and what a mental problem is. Know the difference between being stressed out and, maybe experiencing toxic levels of stress or an anxiety disorder. So self-reporting, it's good and bad, but people just tend to get confused by, the questioning, or they tend to assume things about themselves without consulting a professional and having a formal diagnosis put in place. So, sometimes if the question was, have you ever been anxious? I would think everyone would answer yes to that. But it's like, do you have anxiety? That is a different question. And a lot of people will hear those two questions the same way. So that's definitely part of mental health literacy. But the big piece is to have people understand their mental health well enough to know when to seek help and when to, not use certain semantics in everyday language.
That was a great response. And do you have any comments on how race bias, social class bias, and gender bias, and how they can play a role in getting clinical diagnosis? Any advice to work around them?
Oh man, this is what I actually intend to do my dissertation and thesis.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible.
Yeah, I could talk about this forever because race bias, social bias, gender bias, I could go on each of these forever. But the fact of the matter is that, psychology, medicine, these are still, psychiatry, mental health in general is like everything in society is steeped in dominant culture, right? And dominant social class and heteronormativity. And it's very important for practitioners and individuals to be aware of it. I have no problem sharing. I'm from a mixed race background. I'm Indo-Caribbean and Caucasian, and I was raised within the Indo-Caribbean community. And I have had to, when I've sought mental health supports myself, there have been times where I've realized that this person can't speak to my community because they are not practicing something called cultural relativism, which is looking at something like, anxiety or codependency, for example, in the context of the culture in which it's happening. So they're taking what they perceive codependency to look like in their reality, their culture, their gender identity, their normal, their dominant culture, and projecting it onto me, which as a person of color, however white passing, is untrue. And so we're doing a lot more training with mental health professionals now to get them to be more aware of, like, for example, codependency exists within my community 100%, but it's going to look different in a culture that we live in multi-generational homes. That to a lot of people, like in dominant culture, is going to that's really codependent. For us, it's a completely normal practice. So it's all about, as an individual, it's hard enough to come and seek mental health resources. So we have to get those clinicians up to speed on where they need to be. And they have to be aware of the fact that, where they sit in terms of privilege. And you, as an individual, it's hard, but you need to know that therapy and these resources, they're like a buffet table. You take what works for you and you can leave the rest. And you can always, it's hard, but you can always seek someone else. There's going to be practitioners who are better suited to you than others. There's going to be all kinds of people in society and in the practice of mental health, and clinicians who are going to be more aware of how you are struggling. There are mental health professionals who specifically work with the LGBTQ2+ community. There are mental health professionals who work specifically with people of color and specifically within their own communities. For example, I have a good colleague who works specifically as an Indigenous person with Indigenous clients because they have a shared understanding and a nuanced understanding of what that mental health experience is within that culture, as well as the intergenerational traumas that come with that. So that's kind of where my belief falls. So I don't know if I answered the question, but any advice on how to work around them? To be aware and to, if you're talking about within your app, to be aware that, it might not look the same for everybody, and to include that in your app, have a little disclaimer, this might not work for you, that's okay, no hard feelings.
Lots of agreement in chat right now. I'm assuming we're coming from very different backgrounds, everyone, and lots of support. Someone wants to read your dissertation.
You gotta wait 5 years, my friend.
So we're running close to our competition time. So thank you so much for talking to our participants. And just a reminder that you can ask Katarina any questions in our Discord server, and she'll be hopping in and out to respond to those. So if she didn't get to you, no worries, you can come and ask more questions. So yeah, so it's 10 o'clock now here in Vancouver, and we will be starting your countdown timer. Take a look at our Discord for the resources you need for your prompts and also for any of the criteria you need. All right. Now we're going to be shifting over to a very, very special guest. We have Sori Lee joining us from Amazon, and this will be with Anne, our coordinator.
The Designing Self-Care panel with Sori here. So as a theme of the Protothon this year has to do with mental health, it's just appropriate to have a panel on how designers can achieve work-life balance. And it's actually a very important topic because I believe for every jobs, every titles, being able to maintain a sustainable mindset while progressing in your career is pretty vital. Yet people tend to overlook this. So we are very, very honored today to have Sori here to share with us her unique experience of, balancing mental health as a designer. So yeah, Sori, very, very excited to have you here. How are you doing?
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I'm here just fine.
Nice to see you, Anne.
Yeah, it's been such a long time too.
Well, thank you so much for having me, everybody. I do have a presentation deck. Let me try to share a screen. Give me one moment while I figure that out. Okay. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So thanks for having me again. I am so honored to be here. Connecting with early career designers is my favorite thing to do. Just a little bit about me. I currently work as UX designer at Amazon. I also mentor and teach early career designers. I originally come from business background. I used to work in accounting and I used to work in East Coast, New York City, very stressful jobs. And then I eventually made transition to UX. I also work as a part-time yoga instructor. So I've met a lot of different people, and the same theme that I'm seeing regardless of the industry or their background is that we are all struggling. It's a global pandemic. It is so much going on, and it is okay to struggle. We are all going through the same thing. Today, I wanted to chat a little bit about my expectation I had in UX design career before I start working in UX, and what it actually turned out to be, and what are some things that really was a challenge to me, what really burnt me and other practitioners in UX. And I thought it was an important topic because even though you may feel like, you're passionate about UX, which I do feel every day, sometimes we do feel burnout. Sometimes we do feel like we're giving too much, and it is important to recognize it and prevent it and know what to do when that happens. So I used to be a very innocent designer, thinking that being a designer was just given a problem and then you arrive to a solution. The reality wasn't true. I had to care about a lot of things. I had to listen to users all day, which was my favorite part. But then after I listened to users, I still had to talk to business people, talking about constraints, budgets, tight timelines, and all about, ethics and pushing out the design, communicating your design decisions, and it wasn't as simple as I thought. So really thinking about different aspects like technical capabilities or your company budgets or capabilities weren't something that I had to factor into my equation before. So I did some research, and here are some reasons for UX burnout. For myself, have experienced it. I know that fellow practitioners have experienced it. And number one reason is that we're empathetic. By nature, we're empathetic designers. We're always listening to users, stakeholders, teammates, and we're always there for everyone all the time. And just think about the balance of the empathy that we give out versus the empathy we give to ourselves. And when I realized there was an imbalance in this equation, this was something that I needed to start noting. Another reason is pixel perfection. We're really proud of our work. We love design. We love solving problems for people. And we do want to make people to be happy. So it's a really, really good trait as UX designer, wanting our work to be high standard, high quality. It actually became a reason for burnout for many designers that I've spoken to. The last reason is constant ideation. There is no ending mark for design work. It's always constantly being iterated. And this is what we are taught at school. This is what we think UX design is. It's really agile and scrappy and fast, and it's adaptable, and that's great. But when are we actually done? When do we actually get to feel the sense of achievement and completion? So here are some things that I'm going to start going into details about. So first point about empathy, always listening. Even design process has it. The step first of design is empathize. And we spend a lot of time really listening to people. I went to this conference once with Vivian Castillo, and she was asking audience this question: if UX is all about empathy and caring about users, why don't we care for ourselves the same way? And when she asked this question to audience, I felt so shocked. This was a simple question, but I had never really thought about it the way that she asked me this question. So there are different ways of empathizing, but when it becomes really risky and not sustainable is when we start over empathizing, or when we're false empathizing, meaning that we think we are using our empathy, but we're not using it to do our best job or to serve others the best. So just bringing self-awareness into what is my limit, what is my capability of being able to give, and when is time to check in and ask yourself, okay, I listen to people, I use my active listening all day during the meeting, so now I shut off the computer, I'm going to get myself some ice cream, I'm going to go climbing with my friends and go dance to my favorite playlist. Really start thinking about balancing this out. It is not selfish. Self-care is especially important if you're able to be lucky enough to do work for other people, like how UX does. We come up with design solutions. We always serve and advocate for others. So we can't do this work sustainably if we didn't care enough for ourselves. The second point is the perfectionism. And as designers, we all have it. We all want the best quality of work. How do we deal with perfectionism? I think this starts with sharing your design and being more transparent during your design process while you're working on something. So really, even if you aren't ready, if you're 60% ready, be willing to share your work in progress and get feedback, and make their expectation clear. Say that this is not a finished product. You wanted to get their feedback sooner than later. And slowly being able to open up and be vulnerable about your non-perfect work is going to help you create open communication and, transparency. And this is exactly what you need to avoid, being in that vicious cycle of waiting until you have the perfect work to show. This is an important point about constant ideation. So if you work in digital, it's so much harder to feel like your work has been completed. Think about architecture, think about building a furniture. You do have a final outcome. Often in digital design, it's always iterating, even if we launch something, because usually we launch something that is good enough to launch. So I think one solution that has worked for me is managing my expectation better. So even in the start of the project, this is what I thought I was expected to do. By the end of a project, this is what it may be needed to be done. So remember that the complex systems and people work are never actually done. There is never going to be a label or a progress report that tells you, good job, your work has been done for the day or for the year, for this specific project. And this is so difficult because you're embracing this ambiguity and uncertainty and a sense of unfinished product. And of course, as designers, we want our product to be finished and good quality and ready to push out. So this fixation that we have on impact, this idealism that we have on what our product should do out in the world, I think sometimes does create sense of urgency and over attachment on our mentality in how things need to be in control in every single step of the way. So I'm still struggling with this, a full disclosure. I think it's really important to talk about it. It's really important to be transparent with your team, reach out to mentors, your colleagues, your fellow designers to see how they deal with this, because at the end of the day, we're all dealing with the same problem and nobody has really figured out how to deal with this. So after all of these challenges, I recommend trying to design a better self-care system for you. And again, this goes back to the whole design process. And of course, the first step is to research yourself, understand your needs, what you want, what design means to you, and what do you want to achieve at the end of the day. Is it working 5 more hours trying to push a product, or is it finding a sustainable way to advocate for users, right? At one point, we need to make this decision, and it's really easy to get into a very deep, detailed parts of design, but sometimes knowing yourself really helps with taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. And this is another point, just continuation of that never-ending state of our design process. So letting go of attachment, your requirement might change, your budget might change. And after working on a project, your baby for such a long time, they might cancel on this project at all for whatever the reason is, whether it's business, whether it's users don't want it anymore. So it's part of being a designer. And thanks for being here listening to me. And I'm going to start writing more about my experiences being a designer and how I have tried different experimentations to take care of myself. So feel free to subscribe and connect with me. I am always here to help out fellow designers and learn from you. So thanks everybody. If you have any questions about me or anything that I presented, any tips or questions on self-care, please let us know.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. Very interesting presentation that I believe spoke to a lot of us, to me especially. So just gonna do a little bit of Q&A. So we talk about self-care, and like trying to design like a self-care plan that makes sense for you. I think it's very interesting. But what do you think about this? Like, I think like certain people, they kind of happen to be in this kind of like working or like company culture that feel like, they feel like, oh, like my company culture won't allow me to have that, that sense of self-care, or like they basically feel pressure by, attending all these like one-on-one meetings or like collaborative meetings, collaborative cultures, and all that things. So how, like, what do you think about that? And do you have any advice for them in that sense?
That's a great question. And I think we all suffer from that to a degree. Well, my first response to that is quit that job, change your job, right? Only if we all had the luxury of doing that. And I know as designers with relatively less experience, it's really hard to have any purchasing power in all this process of getting their feet in the door kind of a situation. So I actually spoke to my mentor at Amazon, Kyle, about this exact topic, and he gave me a beautiful answer because I didn't know what the answer was. He said he sees different opportunities as opportunities. So even if they're not perfect culture, even if they're not enough work-life balance, you take what you can take from that experience. So for example, there is a company that you are working for which may not let you have balanced work-life, and then you might think that, okay, I do want to be working less hours. I do want to be doing more personal things. And it might feel like you are really burning yourself out by complying to this company culture. But at the same time, if you're able to take a step back and look at the big picture, you're also getting that experience so you can move on to the next a job or experience in the way. So it's all about perspectives and also knowing when is enough. Also knowing that setting the boundaries of, yes, I can work that much, but here is what I can give. It is not possible for me to do good quality work if I had to work more than this hours. And taking what you can get from that experience, taking little step by step. There are really no perfect answers to this, but hang in there because things change and also you learn something. I always see every opportunity as a learning experience, and it really grounds me to think that what's important to come back to, and that you're doing this for yourself, nobody else. So I don't know if that answers your questions. There are really no clear cut answer for this kind of question.
Yeah, I think it makes sense because it makes sense because like after we're doing the work, one part is for ourselves as well. Okay, so we do have some more questions that people are sending in. Do you ever have moments of lots of negative thoughts after completing a project? I always seem to have a love-hate relationship. Any advice?
Could you repeat that question again?
Sure. Do you ever have moments of lots of negative thoughts after completing a project? I always seem to have a love-hate relationship, I think, with the project. And do you have any advice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, this happens all the time. I think one thing that I have learned over years is choosing my own battle. So again, that opportunity mentality that I've mentioned, I may not love this project 100%, but if I'm learning something, if this experience of designing for wider population, which I've never done before, is going to help me widen my knowledge and experience as UX designer, I would make kind of like pros and cons list on whether this is worth it for me to keep doing. And if it's not, if the cons outweigh the pros, it doesn't make sense to stay. However, if you are learning something, if you see an opportunity in staying in that project, I always try to just take a step back and see, right, this is just temporary. I'm doing the best that I can. And even if the outcome isn't the best, you learn something from it and you proceed. That's always been my philosophy with dealing with work that I might not love 100%, looking at it as a learning opportunity always.
That's great. Okay, and one more question. It has to do more with your experience. So how was the transition phase from business to user experience for you? What helped you get your first UX job, and what advice do you have for people who are trying to make that transition right now?
Yeah, I simply quit my business career because I didn't enjoy it anymore. I would go into work and I would type in something in Excel and I'll just like sign out, and then I'll do the same thing the next day. So I just looked around and I did research for myself. I also asked people, what are my strengths? What do you think I'm good at? I talked to tons of people. I reached out to designers, scientists, developers, different managers, not necessarily because they were in the industry that I wanted, but I wanted to hear people's stories as to how they have refined their career and found what they wanted to do. So, and I find the LinkedIn community, or especially design community, is so kind if you reach out and if you want to connect and listen to their story. I just simply send like a, hey, I am interested in transitioning into design. I saw that you have done interesting work, and I really like to learn your story, how you have became UX designer. And most of the time people get back to you, and the worst is that they don't get back to you. So you just, I would just ask and talk to people, even though it was quite uncomfortable to reach out to strangers, right? And especially if you're in transition, you feel that, oh, like, am I really worth it? Am I good enough to get time with these people? And you will be surprised how much people are willing to help. And everyone who is successful has been through your journey where you are today. So for me, it was all about asking myself questions. What do I want to spend a lot of time with? Do I want to talk to people? Do I want to solve business problems? Do I want to spend a lot of time thinking about marketing messages? So talk to people, do your research, and also experiment, right? If you know you like something, even if you don't love it 100%, try different things. It's kind of like going into a restaurant and ordering different foods, cuisines that you've never tried, and maybe you'll have a better idea of what you like and what you don't like next time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And that's actually how I happen to know Sori as well. I reached out to her on LinkedIn. So yeah, people go do the same thing. Yeah, then I think that is the last question we have for today. And thank you so much, Sori, for being here and sharing with us your experience. I think it's a very important topic. You know, you need to know as a designer. And yeah, people just reach out to her on LinkedIn.
If you want to chat about any of the self-care as UXer, feel free to reach out to me anytime, now or later.
That's awesome. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up, and we're gonna make the transition to our next panel. So yeah, just gonna enter the transition background now, I guess.